Hey guys, I wanted to share some of my thoughts about steroid use in the sport today. I'll probably do another video at some point going a little bit more organized on this topic, but I just wanted to share some thoughts off the top of my mind. The first thing is it kind of doesn't sit right that the whole point of the sport, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in the first place was that technique can beat strength, right? And of course, I think I'm not judging people who use steroids. I mean, I think there's nuance to it. Like if you do it for your own personal life, that's totally fine. If you're competing in a division that says that it's illegal and then you use it anyway, then you are breaking the rules. But some organizations don't even mind. But kind of on a bigger level, just thinking about it, like the real reason that jiu-jitsu took off in the first place was Royce Gracie in the UFC beating up people much bigger and stronger than him using technique. And that was really empowering. That's why I started, and that's why a lot of people started, right? But nowadays, if you were to get into jiu-jitsu, you see so many people that are huge and obviously steroided. It becomes a little bit easier to be like, oh, but that guy's big and strong. I mean, for those of you that know like the history of UFC, they even originally talked about making Rickson Gracie be the Gracie that was going to fight in the early UFCs, but they specifically chose Royce to show the power of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I think somewhat that gets lost as our culture and our community goes more towards steroids. That's not to say that you can't also be very strong and technical, but in some sense, it allows people's limiting beliefs to take over. Like one of the most common things I have happen with a student is they'll be training and they can't do a position and they'll raise their hand. They're like, I'm not strong enough, or I'm too short, or I'm too tall, or I'm not flexible. Limiting beliefs is just a really common habit of humans in general, right? And very often when a student says they're not strong enough or they're not tall enough, it's just that they're doing some small technical mistake. But when you go online and you see all the top guys are on steroids and huge, it makes it a lot easier to double down on that. And of course, you have case examples of people much smaller beating much bigger people, and they should really fixate on that. It becomes really easy to get lost in looking at all the steroid use. Now, of course, there's a question of like the health component of steroids, which I'm not a doctor, so I can't go too far into that. I might do a podcast at some point with a doctor and kind of discuss this a little more in depth. But I think it's obvious if you use a ton, there's definitely risks for increasing cancer and cardiac risks, right? Now, a lot of people talk about doing some amount of steroids as maybe more healthy than not doing steroids. But I think the thing is, it's always going to be a creeping standard. If you say like, oh, well, some amount of steroids is like a fair legal amount. I don't know the exact measurements, but if you just make up a measurement of 100 whatever measurement, let's say that we decide that that's the healthy, reasonable amount for someone to be at to compete. Well, you're always going to have someone who's like, well, if I did 300, I'll be a little bit better than everyone else. And to me, someone saying that going from 100 to 300 is any different than going from 0 steroids to 100, it's always going to keep getting pushed. And even if you say all steroids that are allowed, then you go, oh, well, should we allow EPO, which gives you like really good cardio, and cyclists use it all the time, but it can be very dangerous for your heart. Should that be allowed? Then, okay, so now we allow steroids, we allow EPO, and then it just always becomes more and more people pushing the boundary of what's okay. To me, on some level, it seems easier to have a zero tolerance policy, right? Because no matter what you set, people are going to start cheating at it. Another thought experiment I had about it that is really interesting is very often, I think this is something that if you're not a competitor, if you've never made jiu-jitsu your career, which let's be honest, most people don't make jiu-jitsu their career, you kind of passively watch it and it's fun, right? So it's like, yeah, just put everyone on steroids. It's more fun to watch, right? But it would be analogous like if you were going for a job interview and then you sent your application in, and then the other person who sent the application in lied about their resume and they got the job over you. Or you submitted for a promotion at your work and then your coworker stole your work and then they got the job over you. And everyone's like, well, you got to do what you got to do to get the job. It's kind of like not fair to the people that are actually trying to do things ethically right. Another illuminating way to think about it is imagine if you were at a competition and you went to weigh in, and let's say your weight division's 150 pounds, right? And you're 4 pounds overweight. And then when you go to weigh in, you kind of put your hand on the table and push to take a little bit of weight off. If anyone caught you doing that, it would be so socially unacceptable. Everyone would say, oh, what a cheater. This is ridiculous, like terrible. Like, no one would accept that behavior. Like at an ADCC, if someone tried to cheat the weigh-in by putting their hand on the table for 5 pounds, no one would accept that, right? But I would argue that the benefit you get by using steroids is more significant than shredding off 5 pounds from your weight. Yet for some reason, it becomes socially acceptable for someone to use steroids. No one judges that behavior. But then if you were to do the weight thing, that would be unethical, right? And again, there's a gray area here. If you're competing at ADCC, they don't check. It's not technically cheating. That there's nothing wrong with that, right? Now there's a question of just like long-term sustainability and like whether or not you want to do that for yourself, because once you go on and you feel like Hercules, you're probably not going to want to go off. Most people I know personally that got on it, they never went off. They always stay on it because they get too addicted to feeling like that. Another component is if you are using it is like disclosing it to the people that you train with. I'm not going to name names, but I've trained with many people that I know have used steroids, and often they'll be training and have an expectation level of the people they're training with to be on the same training intensity as them while they're not getting the same recovery. And that's also disgenuine. It's like you can do it if you want, but you should not be putting an expectation on your students to be performing and recovering at the same level as you. Everyone is going to have a different recovery rate. Everyone is going to respond differently. But if you're forcing people to do something that you yourself know you're doing and they're not, that is a very cowardice behavior. Another negative component I would argue about is that it also removes a necessary negative feedback loop for bad behavior. I've been at tournaments with people who are on steroids and seen the night before competition, they're out drinking, they're out eating bad food. And when I was preparing for competitions, I was being super clean in my diet, doing everything right. And if I go out and eat pizza, I can feel my cardio take a negative hit. Well, when you use steroids, it just becomes easier to lax on your sleeping, lax on your diet, lax on your drinking, and you can have all of these benefits without doing the hard work of the recovery. Another thing you hear people say all the time is like, oh, well, it doesn't do the work for you. Yeah, it kind of does. Like the hard part about training isn't the training, it's training when you're completely destroyed. If I come in Monday and I feel completely fresh, training's really fun. The problem is when you get to Wednesday and you've already trained 6 times that week, your body's obliterated and it's hard to get out of bed. But if when you wake up in the morning, you don't feel tired, well, of course, training is a lot easier. Furthermore, there's even studies that have shown, I can put a link in the description to the study, but they did a test where they had 2 sample groups, and one sample group did lots of working out and strength training and took no steroids, and another sample group did just steroids and no training. And the group that did no training and steroids had more muscle mass gain than the group that actually worked out and close to the same level of strength gain. And also keep in mind, in this study, they're not, because it's a test, they're not giving an insane or a dangerous amount of using this stuff. So of course, if someone is taking a lot, it literally is doing the work for you on a physical level. It doesn't necessarily make you more technical, but it does make you massively stronger, and it does make you be able to get way more training time in. So by eliminating this feedback, it allows people to get away with way less good behavior. Now, on a personal development level, I would say that this is just procrastinating you having to learn those things, because eventually if you do go off steroids, you're going to get older and you're going to have to start to learn, wow, getting enough sleep does matter. Wow, hydrating enough matters. Wow, eating healthy matters. So you can kind of like eliminate ever having to learn those lessons, or at least procrastinate having to learn how critical those things are, and then time always catches up with you. You cannot take shortcuts without some form of consequence in your life. Another point of this I would mention is that it creates a culture of lying. I've known younger people who train jiu-jitsu who got into it really early. And of course you can say, oh, well, it should be allowed, that's fine. But people know there's kind of a social stigma with it. But these people have to start lying. So they lie to their parents because maybe they feel embarrassed that their parents are asking, are you using steroids? So they have to lie to their parents, or they have to lie to the IBJJF commission, or they have to lie to other people who ask. And now you're starting to breed into people that they need to lie, right? And then that starts bleeding into other areas of their life. And this is just kind of like it's like Breaking Bad. It's like a slow character, it slowly eats at their character and allows for a gradual shift into more dubious behavior, in my opinion. And a lot of people doing steroids, of course, like maybe if you're in your 30s or 40s, you're doing a small amount, or maybe you're doing TRT and you're just doing a small amount. But let's be honest, there's a lot of people who are like 16, 17-year-old competitors. And I've heard rumors, again, not to name names, that certain teams have put people on steroids when they're like 13, 14 years old. This is terrible. I mean, imagine like if you were a younger kid, or you're, let's say, 13, 14, 15, and you get into the sport of jiu-jitsu today and you see the icons of the sport, do you think that you would be more or less likely to view steroids in a positive light and start using it? My personal opinion is that you're probably going to think it's totally fine and really cool. So you're going to have a lot of people at a young age using steroids that really don't need it. And it just seems like, in my opinion, it's developing a very negative culture in the community that is not really empowering. It's not really sending the right messages. I think for me, like, every time in my career, when I lose to someone or something's not going right, I'm always like, how can I be more technical? Like, how can I work smarter and train jiu-jitsu better? Oh, I'm injured. How can I study video? How can I more specific train? How can I find a way without having to do that? And that has largely developed so many other things in my career. It's developed my ability to train smart. It's developed my ability to be very technical, but it's also developed my ability to run a YouTube channel, to start my own business, to organize my life better, because I don't fall back on one thing. Whenever you fix one thing, something else has to change. And if you fix your character, that you're not going to lie, that you're going to generally be a good person, then it makes you have to get other things in line that are harder. But of course, if you're the strongest guy in the room, it's easy to just muscle people around. But if you're not the strongest guy in the room and you think you need to be the strongest guy in the room, you might start using steroids, but then you lose out on all these other deeper lessons that you would have learned by having to do things the right way. So again, this video was a little bit jumping around everywhere. I was just throwing out a few random thoughts because I think it's an important topic. If you guys have any thoughts or ideas about steroid use, be sure to leave it in the comment. Again, I'm probably going to touch this topic again soon. I might have a few people on. I'll have a doctor on, maybe some other competitors, and we can even have it like kind of a big podcast format because I think there's so much to discuss with it. And again, I'm not doing it to just demonize all people who use steroids. I think there's absolute nuance to it, but I think there's a lot of negative to it that should also be discussed. So hope you guys like the video. Be sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think.